Question number 2, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister of Health. How many days passed between his 6th November press release stating that Health Benefits Limited was making, quote, good progress, end quote, and his announcement that HBL would be wound down?
Come on, Maestro. Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, my release on the 6th of November stated that Health Benefits Limited has made good progress in developing savings plans for district health boards, but that those cases have to be implemented, and it is important to get this process right. My press release of the 20th of November announced the next steps in that process. That's 14 days.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
If HBL was making such good progress, to quote the Minister, why did he decide to can the project before they made the $700 million in savings promised by the government when it was established?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, as I said in that press release, it had made good progress in describing the business cases, but things have now moved to a new phase and we've got to work out the best way to implement those business cases, hence the decisions made in the press release of the 20th of November.
Supplementary question,
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
If HBL has finished their work, as he claimed on Radio New Zealand recently, why did they issue their Statement of Intent 2014-15 through to 2017-18, which was presented to this House in August, just over 3 months ago?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Well, Mr Speaker, a lot has happened since that time. It's become apparent to me that as we move into this implementation phase, we have to consider the best possible options for implementation, and that's why those decisions have been made.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Will the Minister please itemise to the House today exactly what projects, apart from latex gloves and a banking contract worth together about $8 million, has HBL made to reach the $400 million in savings that he keeps quoting?
Sure, we've got a
Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Projects there, Mr Speaker. We've got banking, insurance, telecommunications, vehicle fuel, office equipment, dialysis, orthopaedics, prosthetics. I could go on, but that's a good starter for you.
Supplementary question, Honourable Annette King.
Was the $100 million of health funding taken directly out of DHB's budgets that should have gone to services for New Zealanders but used to prop up a bloated, bureaucratic, secretive government-created agency? Good use of scarce resources? If so, why?
Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
It is actually a good use because that $100 million has produced $300 million of savings, and that's going into more doctors and nurses, more operations and more cancer care. Unlike when Mrs King was Minister, she had an extra $2 billion but produced 2,000 fewer elective operations a year. So I think actually she could have learnt from this experience.
Order. Point of order.
Sorry, Mr Speaker, but this question wasn't about me being Minister 8 or 9 years ago.
Order. When I considered the tone of the question, which talked about bloated and bureaucratic and secretive agendas, etc., I considered the Minister had every right to respond the way he did.
Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Does he think, in light of his decision to close down HBL, that there ought to be a review into their operations to see if there's any lessons that could be learnt to avoid wasting precious health dollars in the future?
Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
No.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
Last time, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to table an HBL document called Stronger Together and table it as a souvenir of government incompetence.
Order. Is it a document that has been made freely available to members? It's still been made freely available to members. I don't intend to put the leave. Question number 3, Chris Bishop.